So probably use a different command.
Or rotation.
Nice. I mean, not bad. Awesome.
Oh, let's go. Try to move this yellow.
Close. I think that was in it shifting. Maybe we should jump it.
Yeah.
Time, seventh time. Go for it. Oh. Okay, it's indenting our cube, so I hope right there. You just want to run it again? While I'm still recording? Go for it. Good try, good try. Please line up. No. Yes. It's gonna go. Robots aren't supposed to do that.
Is that where it was?
No. Okay, so what you just saw there were the first rapid attempts of Kyle and I to figure out how the Doughbot works. A lot of hiccups and, bumps and grinds and overall a lot of learning. But importantly, that was the first step to figuring out how the robot actually worked for the team. In the next series of clips, we're going to sort of somewhat rapid fire a lot of what we performed after these learning stages. Essentially, more in-depth movement with the robot until it gets complicated enough that we include 2 robots working with another team. And I'll make small comments through these to explain kind of what's going on. So, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to talk about Lab 1 while Lab 2 Task 1 plays in front of you, which is just the conveyor belt stopping when the block goes across the laser line. Lab 1 was a conglomerate of MATLAB code of the team solving how the angles in the robot work. It's very long and convoluted and frankly boring. It would not make good footage for this video. Just know that the team solved for the robot and how it finds its joint angles and all around just its efficiency. Look at that block go. And in this clip, this is task 2 of lab 2, and essentially we are finding the angles between these 2 objects, which is critical for the final project to make sure that these shapes enter the correct location on the letter board. And I say it's okay, great. And so does Kyle. Here, this is Lab 3, Task 1. And this one was very difficult because now we had to have the robots communicate to one another using a circuitry board via some cables that plug into each robot. And essentially a signal is sent to the receiving robot after the sending robot finishes its code. Now, the footage here is a bit messy because we were working on this for numerous hours and the robots were being very fussy. Notice how when the sending robot reaches its final position and sends a signal, the receiving robot, which is now being filmed, begins moving. And this is critical to the final project because once the sending robot puts the letters down, the receiving robot needs a signal received to then begin picking up the given letters. Now this is Lab 3, Task 2, where we needed to use the camera to distinguish different colored blocks, which is critical for the final product as well, given that we need to find different colored letters. Here, we were going for red, and it was very successful. Now in the next clip for Lab 3, Task 3, we essentially use the shell function to find which area the shape should go in, which is also critical for the final project. So let's talk about the flowcharts for task 1 and 2 of the final project before we actually demonstrate it. What you're looking at here is the sending code for our robot. And I'm going to give a brief rundown of what it does. Essentially, the camera sees the shapes of the letters and also looks for their colors. Once it sees the color that it's going for, it finds the shape that we're looking for using the shell command and then moves it to the loading platform of the receiving robot. And in this picture, you see 3 moving branches, and that is because this particular code is for a 3-letter word. So you have move 1, 2, and 3. And those all correlate to a suction of the letter and then a movement to the receiving robot's platform. And then once it puts all the letters on their platform, it moves itself out of the way and sends a signal through the circuit, which was set up in task 1 of lab 3, which the robot then receives, and we'll see that in the next code, and then begins its branch, which we will show now. Now, note at the top where the function begins. You have the first 2 blocks, which are simply inputs, and then there's the branch. The branch, which recognizes the signal from the sending robot, will wait until it receives essentially a 1 or a 0, and it's default to 0 until the sending robot sends its signal and it flashes 1, which is true. And since this code runs continuously, or it loops constantly, it's constantly looking for that positive value, or that 1 value, true, to then begin the branches that you see in the large block on the right, where the camera turns on, and then it essentially fast matches the shells, and using the calibration that was performed, picks up the letters and puts them in the slots on the block toy, which is essentially the word fish in this instance, and that's why we have 4 columns. We have 4 letters that need to go in the slots, and so you have a fast match to recognize what the letter is on the platform, and then simultaneously a fast match looks at the shell on the wooden board for the letter slot, matches the 2, and uses orientation from task 3 of lab 3 to then put them in correctly, which was its own boring code, but know that it took some effort to get the code to line up the letters into the slots. And then essentially it repeats that for all 4 letters. So it does it for the word fish, F-I-S-H, which we will see. And once it puts the final letter in, it sees no more letters on the sending board. And recognizing that the board or receiving platform is empty, it's done. The code terminates. So here is our team sending pig. Let me tell you, when that final letter dropped into place and it worked, it was exciting. Now, here is our team receiving the word fish and placing them in the correct slots. Now, you're probably noticing that, F doesn't line up directly with the slot, neither does I, neither does S, and as you'll see, neither does H. And that's primarily based upon the calibration of the robot. It's very difficult to work with these robots, which we'll get into in a quick second, but I assure you that it does line up nicely in general. While this B-roll footage rolls in the background, I want to talk about a couple things. First off, the project goal. Essentially, our goal was to transfer the shapes from one robot to a receiving board to the letter board, and that was the gist, but it took a lot more effort than we essentially expected. And that was simply because, for a multitude of reasons, the robot was difficult to work with, and the coding and the flow paths were difficult to understand initially.
Wouldn't that be boring?
And our team's responsibility in this instance was essentially ensuring that everything worked, since we had to do not only sending code but also receiving code, and we worked with another team to accomplish that, which took probably 15 or more hours to secure. And the puzzle pieces were really transferred between the groups through careful work. We were constantly setting up the move points and calibrating to make sure that the move points were in the right positions, and all around it was not easy sanity-wise to make sure everything worked nicely. And another thing we want to talk about are the sensors, actuators, and the technology. Essentially, we're using the software that comes with this robot to quote-unquote code using branch paths and, in general, just flow paths to make sure the robot knows what it's doing. And there is a camera over the top receiving this. Yes, there's a camera over the top of the receiving board which shows what is in the robot's field of view, and we use the software to recognize what items are in the field of view, meaning that if a letter of a certain color and shape are there, it will take that letter and move it to the correct location, whether that's the receiving platform or the board for the letter slots, essentially. And we used the camera, and which was a huge, essentially, sensor, or whatever you'd like to call it, which is necessary for seeing, essentially, is the robot's eyes. And additionally, the actuator, which is a vacuum pump for the suction cup that picks up all of the letters in the video, was extremely useful. It essentially allowed us to pinpoint pick up letters. And one of the challenges that we ran into was the letters did not like to work with the suction cup on the vacuum pump, which is difficult for us as a team, as we had to figure out a solution to make sure that the letters would be picked up efficiently, which we found to be putting tape over the letters, and that worked fantastically. In fact, I think everybody in the lab used that. And additionally, another challenge we ran into was the robots were extremely fussy to work with some days, and it took nothing for them to be knocked off. We were constantly homing them, recalibrating them, yelling at them when they just didn't do anything right. Whenever you would have it work one time and then you'd go to do it a second time and it has a failure. They were very, very fickle to work with, and that made the project more difficult, and might explain why it took 15 hours as opposed to maybe 6 or 7 or 8 hours. Beyond actual work, a lot of time was spent just doing bug fixing and solving problems, which a big shout out to Srikanth for helping with that, and of course Pansy. But overall, we enjoyed the project, and thank you for watching me talk over some footage for a while. And a big thank you to everyone who helped work on this project that made it possible to complete. Thank you to all the TAs and all the other students. Thank you for watching.